You know, we've all had a friend or a relative or an acquaintance that came back from Iraq or Afghanistan or even Vietnam. But today I want to talk to a young man here. So often the chaplain who is an unsung hero, and as the unsung hero as a veteran, but really is the one behind the scenes that's helping bring our boys home, bring them home safe, bring them home sound, and even minister to them when they come back. Today we have Justin Roberts with us, and he's recently been featured in a movie that he helped produce and write about his life in the 101 Airborne Division that was in Afghanistan. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, sir.
Tell us about No Greater Love.
So No Greater Love is about my time as an Army chaplain and the lessons that I learned from the soldiers that I served with. Namely that behind every single act of valor is selfless love. That's what drives it. So I went on the missions with these soldiers, and I witnessed these incredible actions of courage and sacrifice. And what kept going on in my mind is like, I knew these people before we deployed. They were just regular guys. But I wanted to figure out what was driving those actions. And so that's what led to that conclusion, and that's also why we called the film No Greater Love.
I missed the draft because of the lottery.
Yeah.
So a lot of friends went to Vietnam and came back from Vietnam, but I was in college and law school and missed it. But you didn't. But tell us about your background. Tell us about your education. Tell us what led you to Afghanistan to start with.
Wow. So my education, I went to Dallas Theological Seminary. And but my grandfather, who actually I just did his memorial this last weekend, and he served in 3 wars: the occupation of Japan, Korea, and the beginning of Vietnam. And his son died. He served in Vietnam and then died shortly after. So every generation we've had somebody serving in the military. So I knew I was going to go into ministry. I also felt called to serve in the military, and so that's how I became a chaplain. But while I was in seminary, I got a second master's in media arts and communication. And so when I joined the military, I didn't know how I would combine this media degree, this passion for film. It never occurred to me. But chaplains are not allowed to carry weapons in combat. So I asked my commander and my brigade chaplain if I could carry a camera. And my commander said, sure, just don't get shot. And I said, yes, sir. I'll do my best not to get shot. And so I went on the missions, and that's how this slowly came about. But I didn't know what it was going to become at first until halfway through the deployment. Then we started seeing that this needs to become something bigger. This needs to become a film.
And how many years did you serve in the Army?
6 years active duty.
And did you serve in the reserve some after active duty?
Before, I was a chaplain candidate, and I was in the reserves before, leading up. So 6 years reserves, and then 6 years active.
And how much of that time was in Afghanistan?
It's just 1 year. 1 year.
I saw the movie, and I thought it was excellent. I thought you did an incredible job, and my wife did as well. How much combat were you actually in the middle of while you were filming that movie?
We were getting shot at about every other day, typically. And I went on a combat patrol a couple of times a week, typically. And so it was pretty regular.
I saw some things that I believe were actual, not just depictions, but actual events involving, certain Afghans wearing bombs, walking into the atmosphere of American troops, and it just really astounded me on decisions that do you call it a battalion? Is that
a battalion? Yes.
The battalion had to make at the time. One that just really jumps out at me, Justin, is this girl who's covered and her head's covered, and she's walking up. The sniper or whoever the person was that was an Army member of the battalion had to make the decision what to do, because so often these Afghans would be wired up for bombs to detonate right into the middle of American troops. And that decision had to be made, but that young officer made the decision to wait on the command. Then you can tell me if I did not witness this correctly, because it really affected my thought process on how our soldiers act. And we want to act with justice, and we want to be firm, but we also want to be merciful in the right situation. And I saw mercy all over this young man. And yes, it was costly, because she was wired for a bomb. And he did not take this young Afghan out without a decision ordering him to do so. Well, I just assumed he was believing that it wasn't going to be what it was. Well, and you can explain it to me. I'm just telling you as a person who watched the film, and it's just one little segment in the film, but to me, I saw the word mercy came over me when I watched how our troops acted towards the enemy.
If we cannot positively identify a weapon, we're not given permission to shoot, even when we know that the situation is likely to be deadly. And that they could not, at that time, it was the medic, Tim Lau, is his name, and he was not given permission to fire, even though he knew that she was likely carrying a bomb. And everything about the situation was wrong. Women do not walk alone over there by themselves. Her burqa was disheveled. They're never disheveled. It looked like it was raised up a little bit. And she was a mentally disabled 14-year-old girl that they strapped a bomb on. And that was the first female suicide bomber in Afghanistan. And she killed two, killed several children who were in the crowd. And he thought it would be best to shoot, but he had to get permission. But he also didn't know if he should shoot, because if she didn't have a bomb, he's a murderer. And so we had a 20-something young man who was forced to try to make a decision in that kind of situation. And if he was wrong, then he's going to prison. If he was wrong in the other way, then people died. And
well, those are the decisions that soldiers make every day. And they're very tough decisions. Tell the audience about Doc Jacobs and his grace for this soldier.
Well, so there was this moment in Afghanistan that stuck out to me. And so Doc Jacobs, he was a medic that was in my unit, and they had been getting blown up by a bomber for quite a while, a Taliban fighter. They knew who he was. They had cameras on him, and they knew what he looked like. Well, one night on a patrol, as they were walking back, they were ambushed by some Taliban fighters. And so this was up close combat. Bullets were flying and grenades were being thrown. After the dust cleared and the firefight, the Taliban fighters had stopped fighting, he came on the scene to inspect, to make sure they didn't have any weapons, and also to survey. Most of the Taliban fighters were killed, but there was one that was wounded and bleeding out. And when they looked at his face, they knew that he was the bomber who had been blowing him up. And he had a choice. And the rest of the guys around him were pretty okay with letting that bomber die, because just a week prior they had been blown up by him. But he looked down at him and he saw the fear in the man's eyes, and he had mercy on him. And he saved his life. He started to work on the guy, and he said that the guy was looking up at him like, "What are you doing?" Because he was expecting him to let him die. So I think there's something unique that can happen on the battlefield, that there is this grace that we can have. And that's not the kind of stories that you often hear about. The media doesn't often talk about those moments.
Well, that's the best description of grace and of mercy both, to someone who had been responsible for the deaths of so many.
Yeah.
But the movie also showed me how you ministered to all these guys and these women. And tell me more about your background. What years were you in Afghanistan, or what year were you in Afghanistan?
So it was in 2009 that I joined the unit first, and this was in garrison. But my second day on the job, we had a suicide. And so I went and ministered to the families, and by chance, it was also Suicide Awareness Week in that unit. So we were doing training on all this stuff. But then later that week, just 7 days later, we had another suicide.
Right.
And then a couple of months later, we had another one, and then another one. We also had weekly suicide attempts or gestures every single week for the first 6 months. So in 2009, this was the most suicidal battalion in the military.
Be specific. There was a nickname for this battalion, wasn't there? I know it was part of the 101 Airborne Division of the United States Army, but wasn't there also a name that went back for generations for this?
No Slack, which came from Vietnam.
Okay.
And the motto is no breather from work, no relief from combat, no request for respite, no slack. And because it served more time in combat than any other unit in Vietnam.
So it kept the name.
That's part of our lineage. But the ministry for that unit when I first got there was very, very dark, very difficult. This was a unit that kept up that tradition of working very hard and serving a lot of time in combat. So by the time I got there, after they had several deployments to Iraq, they were burnt out and they were done. They were tired, and people were taking their lives. So we had to work very diligently, and I worked with the command team and I worked with the senior NCOs to develop a program to help them turn around the suicides. And that required us getting connected to every single soldier, making sure everybody had my cell phone number in their phone, being on call nonstop. But it was tough times.
Now, you have some background with suicide, don't you? Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell the audience why you feel like God led you here to address these issues for our military, our veterans, and I believe I learned that you're also ministering to first responders today too. Is that well?
Yes, sir.
Why this issue?
Well, so when I was growing up, my father was a drug dealer, and he was a very violent man, struggled with a lot of issues, a lot of mental health issues. He was in and out of jail, in and out of prison, in and out of mental wards. And when I was 13, he attempted suicide by pushing his girlfriend at the time off a motorcycle and wrecking it. And he was in a coma for 6 months. It permanently mentally disabled him. And so when I got that news, later that night, I was trying to figure out what to do with my own life. Because I had already gone through a lot of suffering, and I was like, you know what? If this is all there is to life, I don't want to live it. And so I was trying to figure out how to commit suicide myself. But by chance, before my dad left town, he got a Bible from a local church. And in that Bible, they had marked, this one lady took the time to highlight certain passages. She said, at the very beginning, she said, don't try to read it all the way through. Just focus on going to these passages first. And she walked me through how, we are all sinners, we're all fallen, that the consequence of sin is death, separation from God, but that Christ came to take our sins and that we can find salvation through him. She walked me through the Roman roads. And at the very end of it, she wrote out a prayer and of how to accept Christ in my heart. So I accepted Christ that night, the second night after my father had attempted suicide.
You were 13 years old at the time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then I felt called to ministry shortly after that. And so when I went through that experience, suicide, experiencing it for myself, seeing how it cursed my father, the second night when I got to that battalion, there it is again. That same darkness. that I had experienced from such a young age was coming back. And but it was familiar. It was something I understood, that we needed to bring hope and love into the situation with these people.
So were you experiencing it personally yourself, or were they? You were observing it in all the men that
In
were
the unit.
in
yeah.
the unit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so it was tough times, but I think the struggle across the board right now, 2018 was the highest suicide rate in the military in our nation's history. So it hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. And the suicide rate in the veteran population is still 20 plus per day. So the number one threat, the number one issue that our military is facing is suicide. Not the Taliban, not ISIS, not North Korea or anything else. This is our biggest threat that is killing our soldiers and service members and our veterans. And so it's something that we still have failed to properly address.
I've learned in recent years, and I have several friends that were veterans of Vietnam, and that many of our soldiers, and it long precedes Vietnam, we just didn't have a diagnosis for it, that many of them have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let you explain your understanding of that. Many of them have suffered from post-concussion syndrome.
Yes.
Because they've been around bombs and things that explode, and that I've had clients of mine that were in such traumatic events that they've experienced, and often the treater is a military physician,
Yeah.
a psychiatrist or doctor who worked with. There's one in our city here locally that does just that, and he was out of it. But I've learned that the symptoms are that they don't sleep, they have nightmares, they wake up in vicious sweats, that they're so jumpy to anything that and I've heard a story once about my uncle who came back from World War II. He was in the Philippines, and he was a Marine. And his older brother he was an enlistment. His older brother was an officer in the Army. And his older brother, he was home and married one night, and his older brother walked into the house without being announced, and his younger brother had a knife on his throat. And so he was still having those reoccurring events.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's an extreme example of people that are suffering today, but I've had several relatives explain what that was without ever, until recent years in my career, having a definition of it.
It's understanding, conditioning is a big part of this, that when you're preparing for combat, the military is trying to condition you to be able to survive that environment and that conflict. And your mind is also adapting to that. It knows it's under threat. It knows it's going into a dangerous terrain and people are trying to kill you. And so your own mind starts to adapt to it, to be hyper aware of everything. You are becoming ultra sensitive to your environment, and also the propensity for violence around the next corner. And so the mind elevates to it, and then we have amazing training up to combat, that the military prepares us for. And so we're at that point, and then we come home, and there's nothing in our processes right now to lower that, to get you off of that. And the problem is that the mind doesn't necessarily know, your limbic system and all that other stuff doesn't necessarily know that it is now in the safe area. And so you start, like for the people who experienced IEDs, and they're just driving along, and they see a trash bag on the side of the road, everything in their senses elevates up to that could be a bomb. And they lost friends to bombs. So that trash bag then becomes a great point of tension. But it's a myriad of examples.
That's a very good illustration.
Yeah, and so we haven't really perfected a way of deconditioning back to civilian life. And so that hyper-awareness is still at play. That trigger is still switched on. And
So as a minister, I know you're not a physician, and I know physicians are involved in trying to, and I call it trying to bring them off of the adrenaline. That's the only way I can understand what you're describing. What do you do with these young men and women as a I guess a suicide counselor?
you know what, I take some of those sessions on. I was doing it on a weekly basis when I was in the unit. Now it's a couple of things. You build a care plan around the person. And so they need to be connected to a counselor if they're willing, and sometimes they're not. They need to be connected to a network of people who they can talk to that are not just an hourly session, but they've got friends and family that they feel that they can connect with when they're struggling with an issue. And they need to be connected to a purpose, something that they are willing to fight for in life, that they are passionate about. Because this kind of gets into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, logotherapy. It's if they feel very passionate about something, then they will drive forward and try to achieve that thing, whatever it is. But if they don't have that thing that they're passionate about, problems are going to arise. They're going to struggle. And so the problem is what we're seeing right now, and what's very interesting, is that our first conceptions of coming home from this war was it was the bombs and bullets. It was the bombs and bullets. That's why they're struggling. It's just bombs and bullets. But a lot of our guys and gals who are coming back, they're saying, that's not my biggest issue. My biggest issue is, who am I now? I was this awesome lead sniper, combat-ready person when I was overseas, and everything I did was important. Everything I did had meaning, and people respected me and looked to me to be that problem solver, and it was critical. And now I come home, and who am I? And we think of that as some sort of light existential, fluffery that's not a major issue. But what we're seeing now is it is one of the most, if not the most critical issue in the transition home, and is the source of more depression than the bombs and bullets.
It
And
sounds
the suicides too.
It sounds like you're telling me about the Chris Kyle story, because he was the American sniper that they did a movie on, and his wife Tia Kyle speaks all over the country today. And I think he suffered from that because he was the best sniper, and he did repeat assignments over and over again. I guess because he did not appreciate his worthiness when he came home, and he only appreciated it when he was overseas. And then he ended up losing his life to somebody who was suffering from this very condition that you're working with our soldiers with today. Tell us more about the movie. You're a filmmaker now.
Yes, sir.
Justin, and I know you're working on another one, but tell us about the success of the movie.
So No Greater Love, it went out to theaters. We screened it at the White House, Congress. It did multiple film festivals, all that kind of stuff. What I'm seeing is the messages that come after people watch it. That has been the biggest thing to me, is because we wanted to put together a film that allowed people to share their stories, that I try to get out of the way as much as possible and let the soldiers just talk and share their experiences. And what we're seeing now is the soldiers, the veterans, the military families that watch it, it hits home, because the film focuses on the hearts of those who served and why they served. And so people just kind of coming back to that and sharing it, it helps give meaning to what happened over there. We can't control the politics that happens in Iraq and Afghanistan. We can't control the outcome. The only thing we can do as service members is serve one another and try to complete our mission. And so people understanding that and kind of reframing to that has helped a lot. And so that's what's meant the most to me, and that has been the biggest success, is that we're seeing it hit home with the people who watched it. And so it's out on Amazon Prime now. and people are checking it out, and it's just
And if somebody wants to make contact with you, how would they reach you, Justin?
most people find me on Facebook.
Okay.
It's been weird.
Is there a web?
They can go to our website, EchoBravoProductions.com, and
That's EchoBravoProductions.com.
Productions. Yes, sir.
Okay. And are you in the middle of making another movie now?
Yes, sir. So we actually finished our next feature, the production on it, which is about a group of combat veterans competing in the most dangerous race on earth, the Baja 1000. And so these are guys from SEAL Team 6, Combat Marines, Special Forces, just some phenomenal individuals. And they did an amazing job in this race. They were up against people who have been doing this race for over 10 years.
For those who don't know what the Baja race is, tell them what the Baja race is.
So in Baja, Mexico, they host this annual, SCORE Baja hosts this annual race all up and down the Baja Peninsula. And it's 16 different classes of vehicles, I believe. I might be leaving out some, but all different kinds of vehicles. And it is a brutal, brutal race. You only have about 23 hours to complete it. And it's nonstop speed and adrenaline. And but more importantly, what we focused on is in the conversations of how do we come home from this war? Yeah. America's longest war. How do we do that well? And so there's an amazing energy behind it, but there's also an amazing heart.
And so the movie is about the veterans who are participating in the Baja Peninsula race.
Yes, sir.
And you're saying that race is done in vehicles, or is it done?
Yeah. It's you've got trophy trucks, Baja class trucks. We had a group of Marines who were packed into a Volkswagen Beetle, and they barely fit, but they knocked it out. And we also had motorcycles. We had this combat engineer who lost his arm in Iraq, and he was racing on this motorcycle in a very brutal race, but amazing attitude, amazing energy, and they pulled it off.
So what led you to do the film on this Baja Peninsula race?
It was this weird conversation I had with a Gold Star who lost his brother in Vietnam, and he was 58 years old, and he was planning on doing the motorcycle division all by himself, all the way around in honor of his brother. And he started talking to me about it, and I'm not a car guy. I barely know how to change oil, So at first I thought it was a marathon he was talking about. He's like, no, it's a race with vehicles. And so he started telling me about it and about the veterans who are competing in it. And what I was hearing was that this is an amazing time for them to process some of the things they've been through in war, to come together for the brotherhood, and as a way to reconnect and do something that's exciting, that gets that adrenaline going again.
Yeah.
And what I loved is it's something positive. Because when we come home from war, we have to reconnect with that community and that brotherhood, but we also have to find things that are exciting again. And so that was what I saw in this, and that's what got me interested.
Well, I encourage the audience to go see the Baja Peninsula race when it comes out.
Yes, sir.
And I really encourage everybody to go see No Greater Love, because it really made an impact on me and my wife.
I appreciate it.
So God bless you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, sir.